Hello, everyone. I am Professor Cristinel Munteanu, PhD in Philology and PhD in Philosophy, teaching at Danubius University of Galati from Romania. Thank you so much for having me invited to your conference. And I'm going to deal with a very interesting topic, I hope, that is on the social nature of intercultural communication. Now, let me share some slides for you. Just a moment. I hope it works. Indeed. So, first of all, some introductory remarks. We need to search a definition of intercultural communication. In a famous and influential American handbook of intercultural communication, Communication Between Cultures, written by Larry Samovar and Richard Porter, it is stated from the very beginning the fact that intercultural communication involves interaction between people whose cultural perceptions and symbol systems are distinct enough to alter the communication event. The two authors do not forget to add that their book is about the role of culture in communication. However, when dealing with the notion of culture, Samovar and Porter deplore the elusive nature of the term, observing that culture is ubiquitous, multidimensional, complex, all-pervasive, and difficult to define. What is more, they also mention Kroeber and Klukom's book from 1952, Culture, a critical review of concepts and definitions, in which are listed 164 definitions of culture found in the anthropology literature. The conclusion is the following. Definitions of culture range from those that are all-encompassing, I mean it's everything, to those that are narrow. It is opera, art, and ballet, for instance. So we need to see culture actually as a multi-discursive term. It is obvious that in order to understand what intercultural communication is, one must clarify the term culture itself. Almost all the specialists who have been interested in the topic of culture have underlined the complexity of the concept and its various meanings. Some have come to the conclusion that the term culture is multidiscursive, meaning that it can be used in a great number of discourses. And as John Hartley says, this means you cannot import a fixed definition into any and every context and expect it to make sense. What you have to do is identify the discursive context itself. It may be the discourse of nationalism, fashion, anthropology, literary criticism, viticulture, Marxism, feminism, cultural studies, or even common sense. So, still, we need a better definition of culture. And I believe that the manner in which Eugenio Coșeriu, famous linguist and philosopher of language, Romanian linguist. So I believe that the manner in which Coșeriu defines culture involves the common core we are looking for. Thus, Eugenio Coșeriu, taking as a starting point Hegel's conception based on an Aristotelian idea, as we will see, defines culture as the historical objectification of spirit into forms which last, into forms which become traditions, historical forms which describe the world specific to humans, the human-specific universe. But what is spirit? Spirit, well, this spirit is historically objectified in the form of culture, is actually energia, Aristotle's concept. that is the creativity or the creative activity itself. I mean, that specific activity which is logically previous to any dynamism, to any acquired or experimented technique, as Kosheri says. In addition, Kosheri also states, following another important philosopher, an Italian one, Giambattista Vico, that the forms of activity which constitute culture are language, art, religion, myth, science, and philosophy. At the same time, one should not ignore the fact that the respective creative activity is a free activity in the philosophical sense of the word free, namely an activity whose object is infinite, that is, never ends. Next, we see that Samovar and Porter, they had an excellent intuition regarding a better definition of culture. Let us return now to the definition Samovar and Porter have eventually chosen. This definition was given actually in 1994 by Marcella, and it is as follows. Culture is shared learned behavior which is transmitted from one generation to another for purposes of promoting individual and social survival, adaptation, and growth and development. Culture has both external artifacts, roles, institutions, and internal representation, such values, attitudes, beliefs, cognitive, affective, or sensory styles, consciousness patterns, and epistemologies. Well, the American authors explain why they chose this definition. They say, we like Marcella's definition because it includes what Harrison and Huntington call the subjective elements of culture, the elements such as values, attitudes, beliefs, orientations, and underlying assumptions prevalent among people in a society. These are the elements that shape and control perception and interaction. There is no doubt that by referring to these internal or subjective elements of culture, but mainly by the observation that these elements shape and control perception and interaction, Samovar and Porter managed to grasp more vaguely, of course, the essence of culture as revealed by Kosheri. So we should keep in mind that communication is the basis of culture. The fact that the two realities, communication and culture, are interconnected also results from Paul's statement, culture is communication and communication is culture. The two American specialists seem to be hesitant when having to decide which phenomenon is the most important. Put into slightly different terms, when looking at communication and culture, it is hard to decide which is the voice and which is the echo. Nevertheless, we have learned from Hegel, this important German philosopher, we have learned from Hegel that language or communication is not only a form of culture among other cultural forms, but the basis of culture itself. So, after these introductory remarks, we pass to some fundamentals. We may talk about the social nature of human communication, since intercultural communication is also communication. That means it shares the same fundamentals of human communication in general. So I'm going to say a few words about the social nature of communication and intercultural communication. When using the word nature in this context, I'm referring actually to the very essence of communication. Well, essence is something that has to do with philosophy. So whether we like it or not, we need to resort more or less to philosophy. However, in the contemporary sciences, it circulates the idea or opinion that sciences must get rid of philosophy and become totally autonomous. This is, of course, a bad idea, and unfortunately, already a prejudice. We cannot completely separate our study from philosophy because philosophy is the science of universal or of universality, the science of essences. For instance, we cannot study a particular language or language in general before knowing what language is. So philosophy of language tells us what language is in its, let's see, in its essence. As a matter of fact, each and every science is indebted to philosophy because philosophy provides every science with its principles, its point of departure, identifying the essence of its object or subject matter. Now, in what follows, I will present some essentials or fundamentals of human communication in general, hoping that you'll find them useful. So first, to communicate with someone versus to communicate something. Yeah, as one can notice precisely from the title of this slide, the topic of our discussion is the social nature of communication, as I said, and we ought to remark that in English, as well as in other languages, there is a verb to socialize, meaning more or less to communicate. The social nature of communication emerges also, for instance, theoretically speaking, from the specialized literature when it is stated that the two fundamental functions of communication language are, one, to communicate with someone, and two, to communicate something. And actually, despite others' opinion, actually, it is really essential only to communicate with someone. This is the very conditio sine qua non. So the second function may be absent sometimes. Next, language as the warrant of sociality or socialness. It is said about language, about any historical language, e.g., for instance, English language, French language, and so on, that it is a social institution. This is true. But what is easily forgotten is that language itself gives man the possibility of becoming a social being. Language is the warrant of human sociality. Thus, Aristotle, in an extraordinary preliminary paragraph of his treatise, Politics, states that due to the fact that man possesses the gift of speech or language, logos in Old Greek, unlike the other gregarious beings, he becomes a moral being, because this way he or she is capable to distinguish between good and bad, right and wrong, etc. Another fundamental idea, language and morality, that derives from the previous one. Language and morality. Well, even more explicit is the American philosopher John Dewey, who in his book, The Public and Its Problems, agrees with Aristotle's point of view. But moreover, he also indicates that what is not discussed, in the political treatise of the ancient Greek philosopher. Dewey says that there is a mysterious law called this way, for it cannot be explained, which is obeyed all over the place in our known universe. That is the law of association. Seemingly, all things and all beings cannot stand isolation and try to associate. Stars in galaxies, electrons in atoms, trees in forests, sheep in flocks, etc. It is all the same with men as biological beings in order to reproduce themselves and to survive as a species. But once language or communication was invented or discovered, men made their way to a superior level, that of society or of societies. The gift of language, this is very important, the gift of language made them capable to anticipate the consequences of their actions. And this fundamental detail turned them into moral beings, since it made them differentiate good from bad. Thus, they reached that point in which they could create not only the state as a political entity and its institutions, but all kinds of societies, organizations, groups, etc., like poet society, chess players society, etc. So all these are possible thanks to language. A modern philosopher, Alfred North Whitehead, a contemporary of Dewey, used to talk about all kinds of societies, the society of stars, the society of electrons, etc. Well, he was afterwards criticized by other philosophers because stars and electrons lack what we call a will. For a society to exist, a common will is needed. Likewise, the parts of a machine that work together as an aggregate do not constitute as a whole a community. The members of a real community communicate. They know and share their goals, their common interests. Now, another important idea, the necessity of expressing oneself. Now, I have previously said that man has an irrepressible need to communicate, to express himself. Generally, when new ideas occur, they are quite vague in our mind. That is why we need to express them in order to clarify them. Then, especially if we refer to scientific theories or political projects, we need to entrust our ideas to public debate so that they may be confirmed or, on the contrary, denied, rejected, corrected, etc. So here comes the next point or idea. Language liberates us from things. Language is also important, for it liberates us from the immediate context, from the physical contact with things and persons, since we can talk about them in their absence. In the case of animals, their communication is actually a reaction to some concrete stimuli. Using the proper channels, this diversity of media, for instance, we are able nowadays to melt distances, to communicate to so many persons, to make new friends all over the world. But we need to clarify another aspect, the superiority of language or verbal communication over non-verbal communication. Because in many studies and handbooks concerning human communication, one may still come across a prejudice or a theoretical error, the exaggerated importance given to non-verbal communication to the detriment of verbal communication, according to the rule 7-38-55% formulated by Albert Mehrabian. As we know, in 1967, Mehrabian published 2 studies based on some experiments regarding the communication of emotions, positive and negative emotions. The results leading on average to the percentage above mentioned, namely, words account for 7%, tone of voice accounts for 38%, body language accounts for 55%. Unfortunately, these figures have been generalized as if the distribution of the different types of communication respected Mehrabian's rule in any message, even if Mehrabian himself has always opposed such generalizations. Moreover, Ray Birdwhistell, a pioneer in kinesics, that is the science which studies body language, estimated that not more than 45 of the social meaning of conversation is carried by words. All this have made some people consider that non-verbal communication is much more important than verbal communication or language, which is definitely an error. In particular cases, in a given let's say, concrete communication act, body language can prove itself more important, sending more emotions and information about interlocutors than words do. Nevertheless, at a general or universal level, things are different. However, one must establish what the essence of human communication lies in. See things from a qualitative, not quantitative point of view. It is the language that helps a man differentiate himself from the other animals, changing him into a cultural or spiritual being in Homo sapiens or Homo symbolicum. It is through language that she or he can acquire conceptual and discursive thinking. More than that, non-verbal communication is the one which permanently relates to verbal communication and not the other way around. This fact becomes obvious the moment we take into consideration the 6 well-known functions of non-verbal communication identified by the specialists in this field: complementing verbal messages, substituting for verbal messages, accenting verbal messages, contradicting verbal messages, repeating verbal messages, regulated verbal messages. So both, for instance, both paintings and musical pieces, for instance, are included in the large sphere of nonverbal communication. They can convey impressions, emotions, etc. But when it comes to understanding their message, meaning, this message or meaning must be verbalized. And by way of conclusion, let's talk about friendship. Undoubtedly, communication enlarges our circle of friends, and these social media play an important part in making new and numerous friends. But are they real friends or only some acquaintances? A friend is a friend indeed, as you know. Should we define friend in a different manner now? Being asked by someone, what is a friend? As we know, Aristotle once answered, a friend is a soul that lives in 2 bodies. Distance is no longer an obstacle, as we have already mentioned, when there are so many means of communication. John Dewey develops beautifully, I would say, Aristotle's idea of friendship as follows. Friendship and intimate affection are not the result of information about another person, even though knowledge may further their formation. But it does so only as it becomes an integral part of sympathy through the imagination. It is when the desires and aims, the interests and modes of response of another become an expansion of our own being that we understand him. We learn to see with his eyes, hear with his ears, and their results give true instruction, for they are built into our own structure. So as John Dewey said in Art as Experience, a famous book. Thank you so much for your attention. And goodbye.